Just testing. Okay, I think we're all up and running. Now this is, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about general terms about the first chapter in banks. As you read through it, you're going, it's a little bit of a dated book, but the concepts are not dated. However, the circumstances under which the term multicultural is used right now, I think we're really in a different world, if you know what I mean, especially since the election of Trump. A number of things that I think have changed over the years, and I've used this book, is that now I don't even like to use the term multicultural because it's become a code word for some anti-American sentiment, that it's seen as a threat. And I could go into a lot of my theory of why this has happened, but I'm going to avoid that for right now because I don't want to give you a political perspective. I want to kind of give you a fairly clinical look at some of the concepts in the first chapter. And then I'm going to pose some questions to you. And I may put these on, actually that one of the first essay assignment deals with multicultural curriculum. And in fact, it's what you're going to teach. So I don't like to see multicultural as something you teach aside from everything else. It's integrated into it, not because it's propaganda or because it's some kind of threat, but because I think it has to reflect the world, and the world has tremendous diversity and even greater diversity now, especially with some of the emotions and sentiments and stuff. It's ever more critical to try to bring people together, try to build some sort of bridges. You're going to fail a lot, if that's your goal is to make, you're not going to have a kumbaya moment where everybody gets together. In fact, we live in I read an article the other day that basically said that we live in a world where politics itself has become a reality show, and we like to see it. It's normally kind of boring, let's face it, getting the roads paved and paying, getting anything from building, power plants or school board issues. Most of this is not very exciting, and you don't want to have drama. But so much drama has been injected into our politics now. But it's like a game, and the guy that wrote this article talked about it like a hobby. The people literally find politics boring, and they want to shake it up, and they want to get, and they certainly did in 2016. It's almost like a minefield. You go to interact with, or go to a relative's wedding, or you go to a meeting, you meet people from all over, and you know that certain topics are very volatile. Depends on where you're from, but depending on who you are and your perspective, if you're in the minority, you may be ostracized. So those are some things. And then I still believe there is some hard facts and hard information that I believe makes what I conceive is correct. But okay, let's just go on with the chapter. You've heard the old melting pot myth, and I use the word myth. It means explanation. It doesn't mean a lie. It's an explanation. So I want you to understand when I use the word myth, it's something that's long held by people or a group of people, and they assume it must be true, that all America is melting into one group with similar values, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we know that's not happening. We know that ethnicity, and it talks about the persistence of ethnicity. We know that issues of racial interaction, racial prejudice continue. We know that conflicts over values between cultures continue. There are some things that come together. For instance, people are quick to embrace food from another country. They'll say, I love Chinese, or I love Hawaiian food, or I grew up eating a lot of food that is Southern food. My mother was from Oklahoma, and she cooked food that was very similar to what was called soul food, or is called soul food, but is black-eyed peas, mashed potatoes and gravy. Some of it's Midwest too, but I mean, it's interesting. Black-eyed peas, I just crave them. I love black-eyed peas and green beans. And if you ever had I never had grits, but my mother used to make a thing called wilted lettuce. She would take bacon grease and pour it on lettuce. It's not really very healthy food, but she loved it. I never got into that. It was too greasy for me. But a lot of it I found in a book. It was a very negative title of the book. It's called White Trash Cooking, but it actually had recipes from the South. And it showed the poverty, and it showed a lot of people, white and black, that were very poor and what they would eat. And it was Appalachian food. And there's a fair amount of it I've eaten, including squirrel, which I'm sure most of you would not want to eat squirrel. I always describe it. It's kind of like rat, only a little lighter, but I've never had rat, so you'll have to tell me about it. But the idea of culture is so electrified now, so dynamic, and not in a positive way, that I feel that as you read through some of these chapters, and it gives some information about ethnic changes, that you can't really just talk about ethnicity. It's so many aspects of culture merge. I just said the food, and a lot of times the music. I'm not into country music, but country music came, if you go back to the roots of it, came from rural England and rural Ireland. And some people like Irish jigs and Irish music. And then you've got a variation with the French of the Cajun music in Louisiana. So people like music. They, if a song's good, they like it, even dances. But the deeper culture, those are surface culture. I talked about that the other day. The deeper culture items, values. I notice in Nebraska that people are always bringing up the word hard work, hard work, hard work. And some people make a perception that other groups don't work hard, but we work hard. Stereotypes are interesting. You can stereotype yourself as well as stereotype others. You can have the idea that, well, this is the way we are. This is the way ethnic Germans are, or this is the way Mexicans are, or this is the way Canadians are. You can go by nationality, if not by ethnicity. And people cling to the ones that are positive, and they get angry if they're labeled with ones that are negative. Okay? You can see this, just look at your newspaper. What is emphasized in there? Community. When I look in Nebraska papers, not a lot. They don't put, at least around here in central Nebraska, they don't put crime waves on the front page. They usually put that further in the back. And on the front, you see 4-H, and you see all kinds of giving back to the community and being positive. If you look at a big city newspaper, you don't see that. You see conflict between the mayor and certain groups in the community, or you see crime reported. All these things are artifacts, and they reflect how we want to perceive our culture. And newspapers in Nebraska are generally very positive. They don't say, well, that we are leading the nation in meth or something. They're not going to put that on there. That may be in the back pages, but it's not going to be something that they want to be putting on a page to sell their paper. They want to avoid controversy, and sometimes they're going to avoid investigating stories that need to be investigated. So some things are left unsaid. So as you read through this, you'll see percentages given to you, and you can see that some of these are projecting the future. These are already changing. Immigration has dropped off. It already had dropped off during the Obama administration because Mexico and some countries, not all, but Mexico had become more prosperous. So fewer people, because it's very risky to try to cross over to the United States. It's very dangerous. People from Central America were more likely to do that. But you've obviously heard lots of negative statements about Hispanics. I'm probably in my family, I'm going to probably have a Hispanic son-in-law in a few years. Um, my son just got married 2 days ago, and he married a girl from Denver, and I don't know how you classify her, German, I don't know, ethnic, people don't notice it as much. But you have these terms, and I really dislike them. The ones that try to use racial terms. And I'm going to give you something a little later in the course that talks about preoccupation